The ruins of Val-Kaarn lay in silence, untouched by the hands of time. Once a stronghold of the enigmatic architects, its halls whispered secrets long forgotten. Most who dared to set foot in its crumbling depths sought relics of power, scraps, of lost knowledge that might command kings and shape empires. But for Kieran Voss, this was just another salvage run, another desperate dive into the bones of the past. Dust hung thick in the air, each breath carrying the weight of 1,000 years. Kieran moved cautiously through the remnants of shattered corridors, his boots grinding against stone that had not known motion in an age. His companions, hardened scavengers with little patience for myths, fanned out behind him, scanning for anything of worth. Their mission had been clear: locate the artifact, extract it, and sell it to the highest bidder. The Dominion of Krazul would pay handsomely for even the smallest fragment of architect technology. If the rumors held true, that the legendary Godforged Armor lay buried beneath these ruins, their fortunes would be set for life. But Kieran didn't believe in fairy tales. He'd heard the stories, how countless emperors, warlords, and zealots had sought the armor only to be denied. No mortal had ever worn it. The legends claimed it rejected all who touched it, burning flesh from bone, crumbling the unworthy into dust. A poetic curse he had always assumed meant to keep treasure hunters at bay. Yet as he descended deeper into the ruined sanctum, something inside him whispered otherwise. The air grew heavy, thick with unseen pressure. A faint hum reverberated through the chamber walls, not sound but something deeper, an ache that settled in his bones. His hand tightened around his pulse blade, a habit more than a precaution. The team pressed on, led by greed and desperation. Walls lined with unreadable glyphs loomed over them, flickering with a light that should not have existed. The deeper they ventured, the stronger the hum became, pulling at something beyond mere flesh. And then they found it. A throne, monolithic and unbroken, stood at the heart of the chamber. No dust, no decay, as though time itself dared not touch it. And upon it, draped in silence, lay the armor. It was beautiful, terrifyingly so. Seamless metal, darker than void space, inscribed with shifting symbols that defied comprehension. It pulsed, alive in a way no metal should be. The God-forged armor, untouched for millennia, waiting for something, or someone. The others hesitated, their bravado flickering in the face of something greater than them. One of them muttered a prayer. Another took a cautious step back. Kieran, however, found himself rooted in place, unable to tear his eyes away. Then the armor moved, a single shift, like a creature waking from slumber. The pulse within the chamber became a roar, the unseen force pressing against them like the weight of a dying star. The air turned electric. Something ancient had awakened, and then it happened. Before he could react, before the others could scream, the armor surged forward. Not toward the strongest, nor the bravest, not toward those who had spent lifetimes seeking it. It chose Kieran. 1,000 voices cried out in that instant, their fury shaking the walls. The armor wrapped around him in an instant, a force beyond mortal reckoning seizing his body, his mind, his very soul. Pain lanced through him, not from fire or steel, but from something deeper, something rewriting the very fabric of what he was. The others scrambled back, horror in their eyes. Some fled, some raised weapons, unsure whether to strike, but it was too late. The armor had chosen, and the universe would never be the same again. The world outside had faded into nothingness. The moment the armor latched onto Kieran, the ruins, the scavengers, and the weight of his past life dissolved into a blinding storm of energy and sound. There was no floor beneath his feet, no air in his lungs, only the sensation of something vast, ancient and unfathomable pressing against his mind. A voice, not a voice but a presence, loomed over him. It was neither welcoming nor hostile. It was something beyond mortal concepts of intention, something observing, calculating, measuring. Kieran wanted to move, to scream, to fight back against whatever force had seized him. But his body was no longer his own. The armor, impossibly heavy and weightless at once, coiled around him with a sense of finality. It did not bind him in steel. It bound him in purpose. Outside, the world erupted into chaos. The scavengers shouted, weapons raised. But they did not fire. They didn't dare. The stories were clear. Those who challenged the will of the armor did not survive. And now before their eyes, a mortal had become its vessel. Kieran staggered, his body no longer responding as it should. His muscles burned, his veins surged with something that was not blood. He could feel the armor sinking into him, rewriting him, reshaping him to fit. A surge of strength unlike anything he had ever known coursed through his limbs. His breathing slowed. His heartbeat thundered, each pulse deeper, stronger, like a war drum echoing across time. The scavengers hesitated, torn between fear and greed. Doran, their so-called leader, stepped forward, the barrel of his pulse rifle shaking in his grip. "Kieran," he rasped, voice laced with uncertainty. "Take it off." As if it were that simple. He tried to respond, but the words caught in his throat. His mind was drowning in a flood of memories that were not his own. Visions of starfields burning, of titanic beings waging war in the abyss, of the cosmos, of civilizations rising and crumbling like dust. He saw a hand, his hand, wielding power beyond reckoning, shattering fleets with a mere thought. But it was not his hand. It was the hand of another, someone who had worn the armor before. The vision snapped away, leaving only the present. The air trembled with power. The scavengers took another step back. Then Doran made a mistake. He lunged, desperation outweighing reason. A scavenger's instinct, when something of value is before you, take it before someone else does. His hand reached for Kieran's shoulder. The armor reacted. A shockwave exploded outward, sending Doran hurtling back into the stone wall with a sickening crack. The others scattered, eyes wide with terror. Kieran had not willed it. The armor had acted on its own, as if repelling something unworthy. His breath came ragged. He could feel it now, like a second skin, something alive. It had chosen him. But why? Footsteps, then a voice, filled with barely contained awe and fear. This isn't supposed to happen. Saris Valen, scholar. The only one among them who had ever cared about what they were plundering. She had spent years studying the myths surrounding the armor, but never in her wildest theories had she imagined it would accept someone. She approached cautiously, hands raised. "Kieran, can you still hear me?" His eyes locked onto hers, and he saw his reflection in her gaze. His face was his own, but his eyes were something else entirely. I don't know what's happening," he admitted. His voice sounded deeper, resonant, as if something else spoke with him. Saris swallowed hard. "Then we need to leave. Now." A distant sound, barely perceptible at first, but growing. A deep thrumming vibration rolling through the walls like the approach of a storm. They weren't alone. The world had noticed, and it was coming for him. The ruins trembled with something unseen, a distant pulse reverberating through the shattered remains of the architect's stronghold. The air thickened, charged with an energy beyond human understanding. Kieran could feel it, not just around him, but inside him. The armor wasn't just on him. It had become part of him, seeping into his nerves, his bones, his very thoughts. Saris was already moving. "We have to go, now." The scavengers hesitated, torn between fear and greed. They had come looking for treasure, but they had found something much worse, a relic of power beyond their comprehension, bound to a man they had once called friend. Doran, barely conscious after being thrown against the wall, groaned as he tried to rise. His face twisted in a mix of pain and fury. You stole it!" His voice cracked raw with disbelief. "That armor, it's worth entire planets. It was supposed to be ours." Kieran clenched his fists. "I didn't ask for this." "Doran," snarled, blood staining his teeth. "Then take it off." The armor pulsed as if amused by the demand. Saris yanked Kieran's arm. "They're not going to let you walk out of here, and we don't have time for this." The rumble grew louder, a low-frequency tremor, unnatural in its precision, rolling through the stone with deliberate intent. Kieran turned toward the entrance of the chamber. Shadows flickered beyond the doorway, not cast by torches, not by anything natural. Something else had come. Saris cursed under her breath. They found us. The dominion of Krazul. Theocracy. Fanatics. Worshippers of the old. Architect relics believing them to be divine. Kieran had heard stories. Entire colonies razed to the ground for possessing mere fragments of architect technology. The Godforged Armor? That wasn't just a relic. That was sacrilege in their eyes. And now, it was wrapped around a man they considered unworthy. Doran's crew scattered as the first of them arrived. Soldiers clad in blackened ceramite, weapons humming with lethal energy. Their leader, a towering figure in a crimson cloak, stepped forward, his helmet adorned with ancient glyphs. A voice, deep and unshaken. The armor belongs to the divine will. Surrender it. Kieran took an involuntary step back, but the armor's voice, or was it a memory, whispered to him. Stand. Do not kneel before false kings. He felt something shift within the suit, a rush of energy that coiled within his muscles like a predator waiting to strike. Doran, still on the ground, laughed. Bitterly, You hear that, Kieran? Even they think you don't deserve it. The Dominion leader took another step forward. You are an abomination. That which was never meant for mortals has defiled itself upon your flesh. You will remove it. Or we will. Kieran's fingers twitched. He could feel the armor's intent, the way it seemed to anticipate violence before it even began. It wanted to fight. No, not wanted. It was built for it. But Saris saw the look in his eyes. Don't, she murmured. Not yet. The soldiers raised their weapons. Kieran felt a choice looming, heavy as the weight of the armor itself. Surrender? Never. Run? Too late. That left only one option. Fight. The armor moved, faster than thought, faster than any human body should be able to react. A single step and he wasn't there anymore. He was already inside the Dominion's formation. His fists slammed into the first soldier's chest, armor crumpling like paper. The impact sent shockwaves through the chamber. Panic erupted. Blades ignited. Bolts of energy cut through the air. Kieran dodged instinctively, his body reacting as if it knew before he did. The armor wasn't just protection. It was guiding him, enhancing him, turning him into something beyond human limits. He struck again, and another soldier fell. Another, and another. Doran's crew ran for their lives. Saris, breathless, shouted at him, "You don't have to kill them." But Kieran barely heard her. His heart pounded, adrenaline mixing with something older, something far more dangerous. The armor, its will, was seeping into him, merging thought and action until they were indistinguishable. And for the first time since it had bound itself to him, he wasn't sure who was in control. The Dominion leader's voice cut through the chaos. Enough. Kieran turned only to be hit by something he hadn't expected, a pulse of raw energy. Not a weapon, not technology, something else. It struck him square in the chest, sending him crashing backward, his vision blurred. The armor screamed in his mind, a furious cacophony of voices. The Dominion leader strode forward, an outstretched hand glowing, with symbols that burned with an unnatural light. "Did you think we came unprepared?" His tone was almost pitying. "That armor is not yours." Kieran's breath came ragged. He struggled to stand, but his limbs felt heavy. The armor resisted the Dominion's influence, but it was faltering, as if something in the leader's power recognized it. Saris grabbed him, trying to pull him up. "We have to go." The walls shuddered. More Dominion reinforcements poured in. Kieran could feel it now. The armor wasn't invincible. Not against this. They needed an escape. But even as he forced himself up, even as Saris pulled him toward a collapsing exit, one terrible thought refused to leave his mind. The armor had chosen him. But he wasn't sure it had chosen him alone. The walls of the sanctum trembled, debris raining down as Dominion reinforcements surged into the chamber. Kieran's body felt sluggish, the pulse of the Dominion leader's power still weighing him down like chains forged from the fabric of the universe itself. The armor fought against it, writhing against the unseen force. But something in that energy was ancient, something that knew the armor that had been designed to subjugate it. Saris pulled at his arm. "Move, damn it! We can't win this fight." Kieran staggered forward, but the Dominion leader merely raised his hand again, ancient glyphs spiraling along his armor. Another pulse of energy slammed into Kieran's chest, locking his body in place. His muscles clenched, his breath came in ragged gasps. He was being forced to kneel. A voice cold and absolute filled the chamber. "You were never meant to wear it." The Dominion's forces encircled them, weapons aimed, but none fired. There was no need. Their leader, this man, or whatever he was, had already won. The weight of the armor pressed into Kieran's flesh, into his very mind. It was resisting, but something in that energy was gnawing at its defenses. A code embedded within the metal, a command written in the old architect tongue, forcing the armor to obey. For the first time since it had bound itself to him, Kieran felt it. Fear. Saris gritted her teeth, reaching into her pack and pulling out a data slate. "The architect ruins have failsafes. If I can override the system, I might be able to—" She never finished. The Dominion leader turned his gaze on her, and with a flick of his fingers, a shockwave of unseen energy hurled her across the chamber. She crashed against the stone, breath leaving her lungs in a pained gasp. Kieran snapped. A surge of something old and furious rippled through him. The armor stopped resisting. It fought back. The Dominion leader's glyphs flared brighter, attempting to suppress it, but the armor's power exploded outward in an arc of crackling energy. The weight pinning Kieran vanished, and in an instant, he was moving, faster than he'd ever moved before. The first Dominion soldier barely had time to react before Kieran was upon him. His armored fist met the man's chest, and the impact sent him flying like a rag doll. The next soldier raised his weapon, too slow. Kieran twisted, a knee driving into the man's ribs, sending a pulse of kinetic force through his armor. The soldier crumpled. The Dominion leader turned, eyes narrowing as the sigils around him glowed impossibly bright. "You cannot defy the will of the architects." Kieran's response was instant. "I'm not them." And he lunged. The two forces met in a clash that sent shockwaves through the sanctum. The Dominion leader raised his hands, glyphs forming a barrier of pure architect energy, but the armor tore through it like paper. Kieran's fist met his chest, and for the first time the man staggered. Surprise flickered across his face. Then rage. A crack of force sent Kieran reeling, but the armor adjusted. His balance corrected instantly, his reactions honed to a razor's edge. The Dominion leader was powerful, too powerful, but Kieran wasn't fighting alone. The armor was fighting with him. Saris, coughing, dragged herself to the console near the sanctum's core, fingers racing across the data slate. "I just need a few more seconds." But seconds were a luxury they didn't have. The Dominion leader extended a hand, and the very air warped around Kieran. The pressure was suffocating, space itself bending inward, threatening to crush him. The armor reacted instantly. A countermeasure. For a split second, Kieran understood. The armor wasn't just a relic. It wasn't just a weapon. It was a prison. It had never been meant to be worn. It had been designed to contain something that had once been as powerful as the architects themselves. And now, that power had been given to him. The Dominion leader's expression changed from rage to realization. He had seen it too. He understood what was happening. And for the first time, he looked afraid. Kieran grinned. He let go. The armor unleashed itself. A tidal wave of force erupted from his body, an explosion of energy that turned the chamber into a storm of destruction. Stone shattered. Metal warped. The Dominion soldiers were thrown like leaves in a hurricane. The Dominion leader screamed. Kieran stepped forward, the armor's full might pulsing through his veins. The sigils in the leader's hands flickered, struggling to hold against the raw, unshackled force that now coursed through the chamber. "You wanted the armor?" Kieran's voice was different now, deeper, layered, as if something else spoke with him. "Come and take it." The leader roared, gathering the last of his power, but it was already over. Kieran moved. A single punch. A single moment. The Dominion leader's defenses shattered. His armor cracked. His body lifted off the ground as the sheer impact sent him crashing through the ruins. And then, silence. Dust settled. The air trembled with residual energy. The Dominion forces, what few remained, stared in stunned horror. Kieran turned to Saris, who looked at him like she wasn't sure if he was even human anymore. "I think we should go," he said, voice still tinged with something other. She nodded, gripping the data slate. I shut down the architect systems. Whatever was keeping the armor bound, it's gone now." Kieran flexed his fingers. The armor was no longer resisting him. It had accepted him, not as a prisoner, not as a wielder, as its own. Saris looked at him, eyes wary. "What now?" Kieran glanced down at his hands, feeling the weight of a power that was never meant to be held by mortal hands. And he had the sinking feeling that the universe had only just begun to notice. The dust had barely settled, but the air still crackled with the aftershock of what had just happened. The Dominion forces, what little remained of them, had fled. Their leader, once an unshakable force of divine authority, now lay crumpled among the ruins, barely breathing. The silence that followed was deafening. Kieran stood motionless, staring down at his own hands. The armor had fused to him, no longer shifting erratically or resisting his movements. It no longer felt like something he was wearing. It felt like an extension of himself, a second skin made of something beyond mortal understanding. Saris exhaled shakily, wiping dust from her face. "That wasn't supposed to happen," she murmured. Kieran didn't answer immediately. He wasn't sure how to. The armor had chosen him, yes, but not in the way legends had foretold. It hadn't been a gift. It hadn't been a weapon. It had been a prison, and now the prison was open. Saris hesitated before taking a step closer. "You're still you, right?" Kieran turned his head slightly, her voice cutting through the whirlwind of thoughts in his mind. "I think so," he said, but the words felt hollow, because the truth was, he wasn't sure. Something inside him had changed, something fundamental. It wasn't just the power, the strength, or the heightened awareness. It was the whispers, the faint echoes of something deeper, something older, brushing against the edges of his mind. The armor was awake now, and it was speaking. He looked down at the fallen Dominion leader, who let out a rasping breath, his once pristine armor cracked and burned from the force of Kieran's attack. His eyes flickered open, filled with something beyond pain, fear. You have no idea what you've done," the man wheezed. Kieran knelt beside him. "Then why don't you tell me?" The Dominion leader coughed, blood dribbling from his lips. "You think you won?" His breath hitched, and then he laughed, a low, pained, bitter sound. "You're a fool. You weren't chosen, you were taken." Kieran frowned, but before he could press further, Saris grabbed his shoulder. "Leave him. He's done." For a moment, Kieran considered arguing. But something in the leader's eyes told him the man had already accepted his fate. Whatever punishment his own people would deal him, it would be worse than anything Kieran could do. He stood. "We need to move." Saris nodded, though her gaze lingered on him. She had seen what he had done, what the armor had done, and he could see the hesitation in her eyes. She was afraid of him, and she had every right to be. They made their way through the ruins, stepping over broken stone and discarded weapons. The armor adjusted with each movement, its weight no longer unfamiliar, its presence no longer foreign. It was his now. Or maybe he was its. Saris kept pace beside him, though she never let her hand stray too far from the pistol at her hip. When they finally emerged into the light of Val-Kaarn's surface, the sky above them was shifting. The storm clouds had begun to dissipate, revealing the vast expanse of space beyond. But something was wrong. A deep hum, almost imperceptible, vibrated through the ground beneath their feet. The air tasted of metal and static. Saris stiffened. "Do you hear that?" Kieran did. And then he saw it. Above them, in orbit, ships had begun to appear. Not Dominion ships, not scavengers. Something else. Something older. A cold chill ran down his spine. The whispers from the armor grew louder. Urgent. Kieran clenched his fists. "They're coming." Saris looked at him sharply. "Who?" Kieran turned his gaze back to the sky, watching as the void above twisted with the arrival of something beyond human reckoning. And deep inside him, the armor whispered the answer. The ones who made it. The sky darkened, not with clouds, but with the presence of something vast and unknowable. The stars themselves seemed to flicker, as if recoiling from the arrival of whatever loomed beyond Val-Kaarn's broken surface. The air grew thick with an energy that sent every nerve in Kieran's body screaming in recognition. The architects had returned. Saris stood beside him, staring at the growing fleet in the sky. Her breath was shallow, her fingers curled into fists. "Tell me I'm seeing things." Kieran didn't answer. He couldn't. The whispers in the armor had become a deafening chorus, overlapping voices speaking in a language that had been lost to time. It wasn't fear he felt. It was recognition. Armor had been built by them. It had been their tool, their prison, their creation. And now, after millennia of silence, its activation had called them back. A deep, resonant sound rolled through the atmosphere. Too perfect, too precise to be natural. A signal. A message. Saris swallowed hard. "What do they want?" Kieran exhaled slowly. He already knew the answer. The knowledge wasn't his, but it had been burned into him the moment the armor had taken him as its vessel. They want it back. The words hung in the air, heavy with inevitability. The Dominion had been nothing compared to what was coming. They had thought the armor was a relic of the past, a divine artifact left behind by gods who had abandoned this galaxy. They had been wrong. The gods had never left. They had been waiting. And now, the time had come to reclaim what was theirs. Saris turned to him, searching his face for something. Hope, a plan, reassurance. But Kieran had none to offer. He had won the battle, but the war hadn't even begun. A choice lay before him. To fight. To run. To surrender. The armor pulsed against his skin, waiting for him to decide. The sky burned with the arrival of the unknown, and Kieran Voss took his first step toward whatever came next.